Our next speaker is Richard Wilshusen. I hope I said that right. His title, History of Colorado Baskets and Pots, How Were They Conceived? He was a state archaeologist, deputy state historic preservation officer at History Colorado. He has worked as an archaeologist in the American Southwest for over 30 years and is known for his work on population change, settlement shifts in the early Pueblo period, with an emphasis on the processes leading to the first Pueblo villages in the northern Southwest. He has co-authored a number of publications in his field of studies. He's recently turned his interests to dramatic changes in Pueblo, Colorado. No, I take that back. In Pueblo and Navajo communities after AD 1540, and to the relatively unknown early Pueblo villages of eastern Mesa Verde. Welcome him. Let's give him an applause, and I'm sure we've got a lot to learn here. Thank you.
I am Richard Wilshusen. I'm going to try to change your idea a bit of what an archaeologist is. Many people have a romantic idea of what an archaeologist is, and that's not totally wrong, but mainly what we do is study change, and we try to understand change. And so I want to look at how change happens. So I'm going to give you a quick lesson in change. I'm going to look at how baskets and pots change, how they were conceived, each of them, and how they might be more alike than you think. Essentially, most people think that material culture is the hard thing to change. I'm going to argue that it's ideas that are hard to change. The problem we're going to consider is, did the early potters of Mesa Verde conceive of their ceramic bowls as just hard baskets? In other words, they literally thought of them as the same kind of thing, even though we don't. Early on, early farmers did not have pots. They only had basketry and textile type materials. They made vessels from it, they made clothing from it, and they put these lovely designs on it. But they did not have ceramic pots. Some of you may think it was hard to think of a pot. But as people increasingly became settled, as their population grew and accelerated, ceramic vessels became much more common at the very same time. And basketry does not disappear, but it is not as used for many of the vessel forms. This corresponds to the very beginnings of the large demographic surges that lead to the early villages, and then the later villages that then are terminated with a depopulation of the area. So why do ceramic pots go with large population? Does the adoption of ceramic pots in place of baskets, does it just mirror population because it lets population get bigger? Well, let's look. Or is it because you've got corn that comes in? Well, no, corn came in almost 1,000 years before. So what are pots doing that baskets didn't do? I think it's possibly the addition of beans that come in about that same time, and ceramic pots allow beans to be soaked and cooked. This allows for a much more balanced diet, which allows people to settle down, store more food, and to make more babies. Very early on, ceramic vessels almost become copies of the textiles that are before them. You could say, oh, well, that's because people couldn't conceive of other designs. They're just copying those designs. I'm going to suggest that it's larger than that, that actually there's a design grammar that a dear friend of mine, a younger researcher, Scott Ortman, has determined that actually is transferred from textiles to pots, and that actually people are seeing those pots as baskets, and they actually have to demonstrate that by drawing those very designs on them. You can see what a grammar might look like. There's a coiled rim up on the basket. There's a coiled rim drawn. Here's someone who has bad grammar. You can't do that on a basket, and it is actually infrequent when you see bad grammar on pots. So sometimes they're just these simple imitations where you get almost the exact same design. And many people are fascinated with that. I'm actually, and Scott was much more fascinated with the grammar of it in terms of the little bits and pieces. So break all those different ways that you make designs on baskets down into a grammar of sorts. And what you will see is the way you've got to make a design on a coiled or stitched basket being repeated in pots, even though there's no mechanical reason why you have to have that design. Are you understanding a bit? Okay, let's go. Now, you could have really horrible grammar on a pot like that. You could never make a pot like that, a basket like that, but you could make a pot like that with absolutely no trouble. But these are surprisingly infrequent, that we have people that have bad basket grammar on pots. And when you do this, this is actually how we do the archaeology, and why most of you don't want to know what we actually do, is actually you can see at different times these coiled rims and rim stitching coming and going, but 600 years after baskets, we're still getting those same designs. When you actually look at 28 shared designs between pots and baskets, almost half of all the variation that we see in design styles 600 years later can be accounted for with those basketry type designs. So very striking. So in sum, just to catch up where we are so far, we've got baskets before, ceramic pots, but the actual designs continue for almost 600 years in a way that the idea of that basket continues, even though mechanically you've got a pot. So it appears that the design concepts in the woven materials were still in people's heads a long time after the material need for those designs. And so one of the things that we oftentimes say about people in the past is they had a hard time inventing things. No, they didn't have a hard time inventing things. It's much easier to conceive of a ceramic vessel than you might think, but it's hard to conceive of it mentally. And so conceptual metaphors are powerful ways in which we make sense of the world. And the way that people made sense of their pots in the past was to think of them as hard baskets. P.S. If you want to get really confused, look at the painted designs on the murals in Kivas, and they're just like ceramic bowls. But that's a different problem that I'm not going to cover tonight. So this explanation and the investigations were first published in a seminal article by Scott Ortman in 2000. I've just riffed on his ideas here. I just wanted to see whether I could teach you a short archaeology lesson in about 6 minutes and 40 seconds. And I thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, after that, don't you all have a better respect and value for good pots? It's interesting because my wife actually used to do artistic renditions on an archaeological dig, and she worked with one of Richard's colleagues, Bill Buckles, back in Pueblo. And when she would come back from one of their digs and that, it was always interesting to see how burned and fried they were. So in other words, they bring a lot to the table, but they work extremely hard for what they bring. So job well done. Thank you. And my wife did know a lot about pots.